You ever get one of those texts that make your stomach drop? Not because it's bad news, but because it's unexpected? Like, you're sitting there minding your own business, scrolling through your phone, and suddenly your ex's dad pops into your notifications like some forgotten character from your past. Yeah, that happened to me last week. Out of the blue, I get a message from him asking if I could meet for coffee. And no, it wasn't about closure or awkward nostalgia like you might think. Let me back up a bit. So, my ex, Jamie, was kind of a big deal in my life for about 2 years. We met in college, fell deep quickly, and then, well, life happened. Nothing dramatic, a messy breakup, but nothing that needed a trial or a public spectacle. It just sort of ended. Jamie and I didn't speak much after that, and honestly, I thought I'd put all that behind me. But apparently, his dad hadn't. Now, I'll admit, Jamie's dad was always one of those guys who made you feel like you were part of the family right away. I don't mean the cheesy, let's do family dinners kind of vibe, more like someone who really knew how to see people, you know? He had this calm way about him. He owned a small bookstore downtown, the kind of place filled with creaky wooden shelves and the smell of old paper and coffee. I used to stop by sometimes when Jamie was busy or out of town, just to get away from my own head, so when I saw the message, I definitely hesitated. It wasn't the usual, hey, can we talk, text from an ex or an ex's friend. It was from his dad, just, can we meet for coffee? I have something to discuss with you. No emojis, no small talk, just straight to the point. That's what got me curious, and honestly, a little nervous. I thought about ignoring it. Why dive back into something that felt like it was closed? But then, as I sat there staring at the message, I realized I was way more interested in what he had to say than I wanted to admit. And so I replied, sure. When and where? He suggested the bookstore, which was fitting, I guess. It felt like some part of my past was waiting for me there, in that quiet corner of the city. The morning of the meetup, I found myself pacing outside the shop, watching the door like he was going to tell me the secret of why he wanted to see me. When he finally showed up, it wasn't like I remembered. He looked older, sure, but also kind of tired, like he'd been carrying something heavy that no one else knew about. He greeted me with a nod and a slow smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. We ordered coffee, black for me, a latte for him, and then sat down at one of the little tables near the window. The shop bustled softly around us, the clinking of cups and low murmur of other customers fading into the background. Then he looked up and said, "Thanks for coming. I promise this isn't about Jamie. It's about you." I blinked, caught off guard. About me? That's when I knew this conversation wouldn't be what I expected. And honestly, that was a little terrifying. About me? I repeated, still trying to wrap my head around his words. I'm sorry. I guess I'm a little confused. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking down at the table for a moment before meeting my eyes again. Look, I know this probably sounds weird. I'm not here to talk about Jamie or your relationship. I want to talk about something I noticed. Something about you. I raised an eyebrow, silently urging him to continue. Usually, when someone says something about you like that, it's either leading to some kind of apology or a warning. Neither seemed to fit the situation. He took a slow sip of his latte, then set it down carefully. When you two were together, I saw how happy you made him. And I got to see a side of you that, well, I guess I didn't really understand until recently. I saw how much you cared for him, but also how much you held back, how guarded you were. I tried to play it cool, but the lump in my throat was growing. I guess I've always been like that. I don't do well with opening up. He nodded. Yeah, I figured. But here's the thing. I think you deserve better than that. Not just in a relationship, but in life. Jamie was lucky to have you, but I think you also need someone who sees you. Really sees you. Wow. Out of all the things I thought he might say, that definitely wasn't it. It felt like he was looking right through my defenses, and honestly, it was kind of unsettling, but also kind of true. I shuffled in my chair, trying to find the right words. That's really nice to hear, but why tell me all this now? Why not say it to Jamie? He sighed, this time more deeply. because Jamie's busy trying to figure out his own life. And, frankly, I think this is something you need to hear from someone who's seen you both up close but from a different angle. I guess I just wanted to make sure you knew that you mattered. To us, to me. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how dry my mouth had become. The idea that someone else had been paying attention in a way that mattered was new. So, I said after a pause, "What exactly do you want from me? I mean, you said this wasn't about Jamie, but you didn't say what it is about." He smiled, a little more genuine this time. "I guess I'm just hoping we can talk. Really talk. Maybe not about the past or Jamie, but about you. And maybe, if you're open to it, about what's next." It was like somebody just kicked open a door I'd been keeping shut for years. The idea of opening up to Jamie's dad, a man I barely knew beyond polite hellos and small talk, felt strange, but also kind of refreshing. I ran a hand through my hair, still a bit unsure how to respond. "Honestly, I don't know if I'm ready for that, but I'm here, aren't I?" He chuckled softly. "That's all I can ask for." We fell into a quiet rhythm, watching the morning crowd come and go outside the window. The bookstore smelled like old books and fresh coffee, a strange mix of comfort and new beginnings. I found myself relaxing, despite the weirdness of the situation. After a few minutes, he leaned back and said, "You know, I've always admired how you handled yourself during the breakup. You didn't lash out. You didn't run away. You just accepted it and moved forward." I snorted. "If you only knew how many times I wanted to scream or cry or just disappear." He nodded knowingly. "Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who carry the most pain quietly. But that doesn't mean you have to carry it alone." That hit harder than I expected. I hadn't really admitted to anyone how lonely I felt after Jamie left, how I kept pretending like everything was fine when it wasn't. "Why tell me this?" I asked quietly. "Because you're important, even if you don't realize it. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to remind you that you're not alone." I looked down at my coffee, suddenly feeling the weight of everything I'd been holding back. The thought of sharing any of it made me nervous, but at the same time, it felt like maybe this was the start of something I didn't realize I needed. "So what now?" I asked, meeting his eyes again. He smiled warmly. "Now, we take it one conversation at a time. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people talking over coffee." And for the first time in a long time, I found myself actually looking forward to that. I nodded, feeling some of the tightness in my chest loosen just a bit. "One conversation at a time," I repeated, like tasting the phrase out loud to see if it fit. He gave me an easy smile and glanced over at the shelves, lined with worn paperbacks and new releases. "You ever think about writing? Not just journaling or whatever, but something bigger?" I laughed, surprised by the sudden change of topic. "No, not really. I'm more of a reader than a writer. Always thought I'd mess it up if I tried." He shrugged. "Sometimes the best things come from messing up first." I've seen a lot of people come in here with stories to tell, but not the courage to share them. His words stuck with me as we talked for a while longer about books, life, the weird twists that brought us both to this moment. At one point, he even pulled out an old notebook from his jacket pocket, flipping through pages filled with neat handwriting. "I write sometimes," he admitted. "Helps me sort things out." It was strange, but in that quiet corner, surrounded by books, and the low hum of the city waking up, I felt something opening inside me. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, not just as Jamie's ex, but as someone who mattered on his own. Maybe it was the kindness in his voice, so different from the usual get over it pep talks I'd gotten before. When we finally stood up to leave, he surprised me again by saying, "I hope this isn't the last time we talk." I smiled, surprising myself. "Yeah, me too." Over the next few days, I found myself thinking more about that conversation than I expected. It wasn't just the shock of hearing Jamie's dad say those things. It was how his words made me realize how much I'd been hiding behind my own walls. We kept texting after that first coffee. Nothing too heavy, just friendly check-ins about books or music or what was going on in the neighborhood. At one point, he sent me a list of his favorite novels, adding, "Maybe one of these will inspire you to write something yourself." I wasn't sure if I was ready for all that yet, but it felt good to have someone rooting for me. Then, a week later, he invited me to a small reading event at the bookstore. A local author was coming in to talk about his new novel. "It's nothing fancy," he said, "just a chance to be around stories and people who get it." I hesitated, but agreed. That night, the bookstore was packed with a mix of regulars and curious newcomers. The air smelled like fresh ink and roasted coffee beans, and when the author took the small stage, you could feel the quiet buzz of anticipation. Throughout the event, Jamie's dad kept checking in on me, making sure I was comfortable. After the reading, he pulled me into a side room where a few people were sharing their own writing. I listened, surprised by the raw honesty and emotion in their stories. It made me realize something. I wasn't as alone as I thought. There were people who had stories like mine, feelings they'd buried, and the courage to share them. As we walked home afterward, the city lights casting soft shadows on the pavement, he reached out and brushed his hand lightly against mine. It was a small, almost accidental touch, but it sent a jolt through me. I looked over, heart beating faster than I'd expected. His eyes held something gentle and maybe a little hopeful. "Hey," he said softly. "No pressure. Just wanted you to know I'm here." I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. "Yeah, I'm here too." That night, as I lay in bed, my mind kept drifting back to that touch, to the unexpected kindness from someone I never thought would be part of my story. It was strange and scary and exciting all at once. Maybe this was the start of something new, something I didn't see coming but was glad to have. And honestly, for the first time in a long time, I was curious to see where it could go. The days that followed were a weird mix of excitement and nervousness, like I'd been handed a script to a play I didn't know I was auditioning for. I kept replaying that touch, the brief brush of his hand against mine, over and over. It was small, almost accidental, but it felt like a spark. And sparks have a way of igniting things you didn't expect. I found myself texting him more, sometimes about dumb stuff, like the terrible latte I made that morning, or the weird new guy who showed up at the bookstore asking for sci-fi novels. Other times, the conversations got deeper, peeling back layers I thought I'd hidden away forever. One evening, he asked if I wanted to come by the bookstore when it was closed. "Just the two of us," he said. My heart thudded at the invitation. It wasn't every day your ex's dad invites you alone into his sanctuary of books and quiet. I almost said no, but then I thought, what the hell? Life's too short for second-guessing. So I showed up after hours, the shop dark except for a small lamp casting a warm glow over the counter. He was waiting by the entrance, looking less like the dad I'd known and more like someone I barely recognized, calm, confident, and genuinely happy to see me. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than before. "Hey," I replied, trying to steady the nervousness creeping up my spine. He motioned toward a cozy reading nook tucked in the back corner, where two mismatched chairs sat facing each other. "Make yourself comfortable. I thought we could just talk. No expectations." I settled into the chair, feeling the worn fabric under my fingers. For a moment, we just sat there, the silence between us humming with unspoken things. "So," he began, "how have you really been since everything with Jamie?" I hesitated. It was a question I'd dodged more times than I cared to admit. But here, in this quiet space filled with books and his steady presence, I felt safe enough to answer honestly. "Lonely," I said after a pause, and scared, like I'm stuck in this loop of what ifs and could have beens. He nodded slowly. "I get that. Breakups can feel like losing a part of yourself, but it doesn't have to define you." I looked up, meeting his gaze. There was something raw and sincere in his expression that made me want to believe him. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" he asked. "All the time?" I admitted, "but it feels like I'm moving through fog. I don't know where to go, or if I even want to." He smiled gently. "Sometimes, The fog clears only when you take the first step, or when someone reaches out to walk with you. I felt my heart skip. Was he offering to be that someone? Before I could overthink it, I found myself reaching out, placing my hand over his. His skin was warm, and his fingers curled around mine like they'd been waiting for this moment too. "Maybe I don't have to walk alone," I whispered. He squeezed my hand lightly. "You don't." We sat there, hands entwined, letting the silence wrap around us. Not the heavy silence of unspoken pain, but the quiet comfort of two people finding a new connection. Days turned into weeks, and our meetings became a routine I looked forward to more than I expected. Sometimes it was coffee in the morning, sometimes late-night talks, surrounded by stacks of books. He told me stories about his own struggles, his dreams before life pulled him in different directions. I shared pieces of my past I hadn't even admitted to myself. And through it all, the line between ex's dad and something more started to blur. One rainy afternoon, as we sheltered in the bookstore from a sudden downpour, he pulled me close, his voice low. "I didn't plan for any of this to happen." "Neither did I confessed, heart pounding. "But maybe it's exactly what we need," he said, brushing a wet strand of hair from my forehead. I leaned into his touch, feeling a sense of belonging I hadn't known I craved. "Let's see where this goes," I said softly. He smiled, and in that moment the bookstore wasn't just a place filled with stories, it was the start of ours. We sat there in the quiet bookstore, rain pattering softly against the windows, the world outside blurring into streaks of gray. Somehow the storm made everything feel more intimate, more real. I looked up at him, that familiar face now holding new meaning, and felt a strange mixture of hope and anxiety swirling in my chest. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "what do we do now? I mean, we've basically rewritten the definition of family gatherings, right?" He chuckled, the sound warm and low. "Yeah, I guess we have. But honestly, I'm not in a rush to figure it all out. I just want to take it slow, see where this connection goes without all the noise." I nodded, relieved. The last thing I needed was pressure or expectations. Just something genuine and steady felt like a breath of fresh air. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about our conversation more than I expected. It wasn't just about him or Jamie. It was about me, about what I wanted, who I was beneath the layers I'd built to keep safe. For the first time in a long time, I considered the possibility that maybe I deserved more than just being the ex. Then came the inevitable question. How do we tell Jamie? It wasn't like I wanted to sabotage his relationship with his dad, and I knew this news would come as a shock. Hell, it was a shock to me. One afternoon, I found myself standing outside Jamie's apartment, phone in hand, debating whether to call or just show up. I ended up texting him instead, short and honest. "Hey, can we talk? It's about your dad and me." His reply was quick but cautious. "Sure. When?" We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe not far from the bookstore. The air was thick with unspoken tension as Jamie slid into the seat across from me, eyes flickering between curiosity and something harder to read. "Okay," he said, folding his hands on the table. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath. "I want to be honest with you. Your dad and we've started seeing each other. I didn't plan for it, and I know it's complicated." Jamie's expression shifted. There was surprise, yeah, but also something else. Maybe understanding? Or maybe just acceptance. "I'm glad you told me," he said quietly. "It's definitely unexpected, but I want you to be happy." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "Thank you. That means more than you know." We talked longer after that, about boundaries, feelings, and how to navigate this new dynamic without breaking what we all still cared about. It wasn't easy, but it felt real. Meanwhile, with his dad, things settled into a comfortable rhythm. We shared quiet mornings in the bookstore, trading book recommendations and stories from our pasts. He introduced me to his favorite vinyl records, and I found myself humming songs I'd never heard before, but now loved. One evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, we sat on the bookstore's tiny rooftop, wrapped in a shared blanket against the chill. He looked over at me, the fading light casting soft shadows on his face. "You know," he said, "I never thought I'd find this, something unexpected, something real, after everything." I smiled, leaning into him. "Me neither, but I'm glad we did." He kissed my forehead gently, and I felt the steady beat of his heart against mine. It wasn't perfect or simple, but it was ours. Life after Jamie wasn't supposed to be this complicated or this beautiful. But sometimes, the best stories are the ones you never saw coming. A few weeks into this new, unexpected chapter, I realized how much my world had shifted. Not just because of the coffee shop dates or the quiet talks, but because I was starting to feel seen in ways I hadn't for a long time. Being with Jamie's dad wasn't something I'd planned or even imagined, but it was becoming something I didn't want to let go of. One Saturday morning, I stopped by the bookstore early. The city was still waking up, and the golden light was slanting through the windows, casting long shadows over the hardwood floor. I found him behind the counter, sorting through a fresh shipment of books with that familiar furrowed brow that made him look like he was solving the world's problems one paperback at a time. "Morning," I said, dropping my bag on a nearby chair. He looked up and smiled, a slow, easy smile that made me feel like I was home. "You're early," I shrugged, grinning. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd see if you wanted to grab breakfast before the rush." He nodded, wiping his hands on his apron. "Sounds perfect." We walked to a small diner down the block, the kind of place where the waitress knows your order before you sit down. Over pancakes and coffee, the conversation drifted from light to serious, without us really noticing. He told me about a friend who'd just published his first novel, and I shared some half-baked ideas I'd been scribbling in my notebook. "You should write something," he said, eyes bright. "I think you have a story worth telling." I laughed, shaking my head. "I'm not sure anyone would want to read it." He reached across the table, his hand brushing mine. "You'd be surprised." That simple touch set off a warmth in my chest that I couldn't ignore. Later that day, back at the bookstore, we found ourselves alone as the afternoon sun started to dip. He pulled out an old guitar from a corner and strummed a few chords, the music filling the quiet space between us. "I used to play more," he said softly. "Haven't picked it up in a while." "Mind if I listen?" I asked, sliding closer. He nodded and played a melody that felt like a secret just for us. In that moment, surrounded by books and fading light, it was easy to forget about the complications, about Jamie, about the awkwardness of our beginning. All that mattered was this. A few days later, I was sitting on my couch when my phone buzzed. It was Jamie. "Hey," the message read. "Want to grab dinner tonight? Thought it'd be good to catch up." I hesitated. Jamie and I had settled into a place of civility, but this was the first time he'd reached out like this since everything changed. I looked over at the photo on my wall, a picture of Jamie and me from happier times, and then at my phone. I typed back, "Yeah, I'd like that." Dinner that night was a mix of nostalgia and new understanding. Jamie smiled more easily than I expected, and we talked about the future. Not just his, but ours. I told him about the bookstore, about his dad, about how life had surprised me in the best way. He listened, really listened, and when I finished, he said, "I'm glad you're happy. You deserve that." The words hit me harder than I thought they would. Walking home afterward, I felt lighter, like a chapter had closed, but a new one was just beginning. That night, I sat by the window, the city lights twinkling below, and I thought about how strange and beautiful life could be. How sometimes the people you least expect become the ones who change everything. And as I looked at my phone, I saw a message from him. "Thinking about you." I smiled, my heart full. "Thinking about you too." I typed back. Maybe this was the start of a story worth telling after all. After that night, things felt like they were slowly finding a new rhythm. I'd always thought of Jamie's dad as this steady, calm presence, the kind of guy who's seen a lot in life but doesn't wear it on his sleeve. But living it now, being around him more, I was starting to see other sides. The little quirks, the quiet laugh when something amused him, the way his eyes lit up talking about something he loved. It was different, but it felt right. One evening, we were closing up the bookstore together. The place was almost empty, except for a few lone customers browsing near the back. I was stacking some returned books when I heard him softly humming behind me. I looked over, and there he was, sitting cross-legged on the floor, flipping through a worn copy of some old poetry collection. "Hey," I said, sliding down beside him. He smiled, the kind that made his whole face soften. "Found this earlier today. Thought I'd finally give it a read." I leaned closer, catching a whiff of his cologne mixed with the faint scent of old paper. "You read poetry?" "Sometimes," he admitted, eyes twinkling. "I like how it captures things that are hard to say." I nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, like how I've been feeling lately." He glanced at me, curious. "It's crazy," I continued, "how life throws you into situations you never expected. Like, I never imagined I'd be here, sitting beside you, talking about poems and feelings." He chuckled softly. "Neither did I, but I'm glad we are." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the rustling of pages and the distant hum of the city settling into night. Then, without thinking too much, I reached out and took his hand. His fingers intertwined with mine, warm and solid. "Do you ever wonder about what people think?" I asked after a moment. "Like what they'd say if they knew about us?" He sighed. "All the time. But in the end, I don't care. What matters is what we have, not what anyone else imagines." I smiled, feeling a mix of relief and something deeper. Hope, maybe. Asterisk. 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 A few days later, we decided to take a trip out of the city. Just the two of us. No distractions, no expectations. We drove out to this quiet lakeside town Jamie's dad had loved as a kid. The kind of place where the air smells like pine and the only traffic is the occasional car passing on the main road. We rented a small cabin right on the water's edge, the wooden porch overlooking the lake. That first night, we sat wrapped in blankets, watching the stars come out one by one. "I forgot how peaceful this is," I said quietly. He nodded, squeezing my hand. "Sometimes you have to get away to remember what really matters." We talked about everything, our fears, our dreams, the awkwardness of starting over in the middle of life. He told me about his own youth, about the mistakes and the moments that shaped him. I shared stories I hadn't told anyone, about the loneliness I felt after Jamie, the way I'd closed off to protect myself. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that honesty felt like a new kind of freedom. On the last night there, we sat on the porch, the lake shimmering under the moonlight. He reached over and brushed a stray hair from my face, his touch gentle. "I'm glad you came with me," he said softly. "Me too," I whispered. He leaned in slowly, and I met him halfway. The kiss was tentative at first, like testing uncharted waters, then deepened, warm, reassuring. When we pulled apart, I rested my forehead against his. "This feels right." He smiled. "It does. Asterisk, asterisk." Back in the city, life didn't magically become easier. There were days when the past crept back in, when questions and doubts gnawed at the edges of this new relationship. But we faced them together one step at a time. One afternoon, as we were reorganizing a shelf near the front, he paused and looked at me thoughtfully. "You know," he said, "I don't want to keep this a secret forever. I want to be proud of what we have, not hiding in the shadows." I swallowed hard, knowing he was right. "Yeah, me too, but we have to figure out how. For Jamie, for us." He nodded. "We'll take it slow. Together." And with that, I realized that sometimes love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It's about the messy, uncertain, beautiful moments in between. The courage to be vulnerable, to face the unknown hand in hand. As I looked at him standing there, surrounded by stacks of books and soft afternoon light, I knew one thing for sure. I was ready to see where this story would go. With him, weeks turned into months, and our quiet little world carved itself into something steady and real. We settled into a rhythm, not perfect or without its bumps, but ours. The bookstore became our shared space in every way, a refuge, a playground, a place where our stories, both old and new, lived side by side. One chilly evening, as autumn painted the streets gold and red, we closed up the shop together. The city lights flickered on, casting a warm glow through the windows. I found him leaning against the counter, the familiar calm in his eyes that had always drawn me in. "Ready to head out?" I asked, slipping my hand into his. He looked down at our joined fingers and smiled. "Yeah, but first..." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded note. Curious, I unfolded it. It was a poem, short, simple, but filled with a quiet honesty that caught me off guard. I wrote it for you, he said softly. Part of me, I guess I've been holding back. I blinked, feeling something warm uncoil in my chest. I'm honored. It's beautiful. He shrugged, the hint of a shy grin tugging at his lips. Not as beautiful as you. We laughed, a shared moment that felt like the closing of a circle. His words, the way he said them, were a reminder of how far we'd come. From strangers caught in a complicated past to something tender and true. As we stepped out into the crisp night air, I took a deep breath, feeling the coolness mix with the warmth radiating from his side. Funny, I said, how life works. I never expected to find this, not just a relationship, but a real connection with you, with Jamie's dad. He squeezed my hand. Neither did I, but I'm grateful every day that we did. We walked together, footfalls soft on the quiet sidewalk, the city humming gently around us. No grand declarations, no fireworks, just two people moving forward, choosing to be present with each other. Later, lying side by side in the dark, I thought about all the what-ifs that used to haunt me. What if I hadn't answered that text? What if I'd turned away from this chance? The truth was, I'd never really wanted closure from the past. What I wanted was a new beginning. And somehow, in the most unexpected way, I'd found it. With his steady breath beside me and the soft hum of the city outside, I finally felt at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And that made all the difference.